Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics by the Fireside. In this episode of the show, we're going to be discussing the next in the lineup of the AFI's Top 100 American Movies, Midnight Cowboy, followed by First Man. Stay tuned.
Stop it or just keep it rolling?
We can keep rolling.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us once again is our executive producer, Darrin.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Glad to be back.
In our house.
In our house, yes.
So, naturally, as we talked about, we have this beautiful set that's decked out for this discussion. And obviously, this is going to bolster our discussion of Midnight Cowboy beautifully. So,
Oh!
yeah, exactly.
All right. So, Midnight Cowboy. Now, prior to, and I have to admit, this is the very first time that I've ever watched Midnight Cowboy the entire way through. My previous experience with Midnight Cowboy was a very silly bit that was done on the old Second City television show back in the day, where John Candy played the John Voight character and Eugene Levy played the Dustin Hoffman character, but doing so as Dr. Tongue and Dr. Tongue's assistant on Monster Killer Horror Theater. And I have to admit, after seeing the show, I've seen Midnight Cowboy, I kind of miss Dr. Tongue and Monster Killer Horror Theater, but that's just me. So I think this is a film that back in the day, had I watched it and had been old enough to watch it back in the day, I was a wee lad when it first came out. It would have maybe been more impactful, but I just don't think this is a movie that's aged all that well.
I mean, my first thought on it was, this is flagrant false advertising. But I remember I bought this at a garage sale. Like, it was just a big lot. It was like the last 5 minutes of the garage sale, and he's like, tell you what, go over to the DVD section. You can take whatever you want, and you can pay me whatever you want, because it's all going to Goodwill. And this is like, oh, a cowboy movie with John Voight. And I didn't realize that it was actually a movie about prostitution. So
yes, male prostitution, and that is, and maybe that's a little bit of what it takes to kind of get in the movie, because who's the good guy? The protagonist. Who's really protagonist? You have John Voight, who wants to go and exploit himself. Dustin Hoffman wants to exploit John Voight. And Brenda Vaccaro wants to exploit John Voight, but that doesn't happen until much later in the motion picture. So I guess just from a motivational standpoint, I just had a hard time getting my mind around. When I want to go to the movies, I want to like somebody. Is that wrong?
No.
Is there anybody particularly likable in this movie?
I mean, I kind of sympathize with John Voight. He's decent. I mostly because I like John Voight in other movies, which is
you sympathize with John Voight, but you don't
like him. I
like
guess.
John Voight.
I guess.
And seeing him chomp on his gum for hour after hour in this motion picture was not something that I was particularly keen on either.
He's playing like a parody of like the cowboy 50s roles, but like he's like playing up the swagger, but it's like he's just playing it for like the joke of it, because he's obviously he's a young attractive guy and he's gonna start sleeping around, so he's playing it up to sell it to people. Maybe that's a theme or something, but it's this movie is like super 60s counterculture movie, like almost nothing there's tons of like drug paraphernalia and free love and all that stuff, and at times it's one of those things where I think if you're into that sort of thing, this movie probably it'd probably be a good movie to kind of chill with, to smoke a bong and enjoy the movie that way. But in my clean cut, it means it's not my thing.
So we'll just leave it as they would on How I Met Your Mother and just say, light up a sandwich. Let's just put it that way. So if someone chooses, unless you're in Canada watching this,
I forgot about that joke.
When you're ready to light up a sandwich, then that's the perfect movie, maybe the perfect movie for you.
That's such a great joke. Oh, I'm telling the story to my kid. Oh, I can't let them know I'm smoking pot. So we lit up sandwiches. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yes. So, so those are really my issues with the film. That that was pretty straightforward in terms of what they were trying to do. The main characters, not particularly likable. That they really were only able to advance themselves either by doing something bad or violent. Especially at the end of the motion picture. That I think if there was a positive side of the film, it was really coming to the idea that that prostitution, you saw that through John Voight's character, not all that it's cracked up to be. Oh, I'm gonna go to New York and I'm gonna have sex with lots of women. They're gonna pay me for it.
I mean,
Yay!
I don't get this. I mean, there are movies like that where characters will go out and they'll do something countercultural and they'll pay for it. But I don't think that's what the lesson the movie wants you to take away. Because I think the movie, it really indulges in the 60s trippy counterculture stuff. Like, it wants you to be on board with that. It assumes you're on board with that. So
it does, but it also shows the negative side too. The fact that they were both living in abject poverty. They're living in a condemned house, a condemned building. They sneak in every night to this condemned building that Dustin Hoffman has health problems that are exacerbated simply by the fact that he's in a building that has no heat and he's probably drinking fetid water and can't get a decent meal, and all these pieces are coming in time and well.
Yeah, did this movie win Oscars or? Because I know this was on the AFI list, obviously, for its notoriety. So,
yes.
Like, that was my assumption was, Academy Award and Oscar are, this won something, so. And it got 2 thumbs up from Siskel and Ebert, so.
Right, so we can Chiron that in a little bit later on as far as the awards and the like, and so that would be my fault. And then that really goes to, shall we say, my not really liking the film, that I didn't want to do that much research on it simply because, well...
Just take away, the takeaway from this is that the man who wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls enjoyed this movie, so... who's no longer with us, so... Well, yes, but you can't take that away from him.
No, you can't.
I don't know if that counts as an accomplishment or not, but...
Well, for him it was.
I did have a interesting thought on this, like...
Okay.
Setting, in terms of this and our other film, Thirst Man, they're both the same setting, 1960s America.
Yes.
I remembered a story you told me once about Woodstock. That being, it happened the same year, 1969, the same year as the Apollo 11 launch, correct?
The same year, the same month, same time frame. So we'll talk more about that in First Man. But all these events were happening simultaneously.
Yeah. And the point that always struck me home with that was you mentioned that the Apollo 11 launch had more people than Woodstock.
Yes.
That's not something people talk about really, because everyone talks about Woodstock as like the be all end all of the '60s.
Yes.
It's like everyone was there.
And you had 250,000 people rolling around in the mud in upstate New York.
Yeah.
You had roughly a conservative estimates, mostly. Over 1 million people lining the beaches in the middle of Florida, on the Atlantic coast of Florida, watching this event happen. 1 million people, okay? So one of the largest accumulations of folks that have ever gotten together did that to watch this event. And so if we're just basing significance on the number of people that were there, I think it's a significant piece to to contemplate.
And one of them is being immortalized in a film in 2018, and the other one
was immortalized in the film that was shown in Omega Man.
I was going to say it feels dated.
Yes, and that's which is kind of how I started off. That here we are, and as I'm looking at this film today and looking back
capsule.
at it, it's a time capsule. It didn't wear well.
Don't get me wrong, I like time capsules. 80s movies are great. So that's all the time we have for the segment. Join us for the next segment where we'll be moving on officially to First Man. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the show. So now we get to talk about the movie we actually prepared for. So.
Yes, we did.
In more senses than one.
We get to talk a little bit about First Man, and
his whole life has been waiting for this. You can't tell by the plethora.
Not all of it's mine. I'm just saying.
The Buzz Aldrin experience. So.
Yes, which is more fun than you think, but again, that's not important right now. So First Man, really biopic about Neil Armstrong, first man to ever step on the moon, and really it's not just about the moon mission, it's really all the things that led up to it. So the first time you see Neil Armstrong, he's in an X-15 aircraft. So X-15, if you're not familiar with it, was a very experimental. The X and X-15 was experimental aircraft that were designed to go really high, really fast, and they were extremely difficult to fly, and they got so high they actually flew themselves out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, they addressed that in the first few seconds of the film where he briefly almost doesn't come back to the Earth.
Right,
so.
And he's trying to come back into the atmosphere, and he bounces off. Instead of going down in altitude, he's going back up significantly and performs a maneuver that basically forces the aircraft back into the Earth's atmosphere, and he's able to do so and land reasonably safely. He walks away from it. As they say, if you walk away from a landing, then you've landed successfully.
Which is a big deal because
right.
they bring up in the film. There's a lot of people that don't.
Yes. So test pilots, and this is certainly something Tom Wolfe wrote about in The Right Stuff, and certainly it was displayed in the motion picture of the same name, that there are just so many. Well, it's about 13.
I was going to bring up, like, this is not the first Apollo movie. Like, there's been a lot. This is probably the most familiar one for a lot of people.
Yes.
There's Right Stuff. There's
From the Earth to the Moon.
For All Mankind, the documentary, which is very good.
So that's a really great point, because many of the significant events that took place from Neil Armstrong, from the point that he was an experimental pilot with the X-15 program, into Gemini, into Apollo, these are not new events for people that know Neil Armstrong's story. And so to me, the question is, well, is there something new? How did they do this differently than what I've seen before, from what I've seen in From the Earth to the Moon, or seen in some of the other Apollo pieces? And I don't know if that's there.
I think that there's one angle that this movie hits really well. My thoughts on the movie overall is that I thought that from a biopic standpoint, I don't think we learned that much about Neil Armstrong's internal life.
Yeah.
So all of the scenes that aren't about the flying are pretty slow.
Yes.
Which is probably the thing that's probably going to turn more people off than anything not. The thing that I think this movie really hones in on and gets really well is the experience of being in an experimental aircraft that you might not survive takeoff on.
Yeah.
And I think that because the movie's perspective, almost every one of these, you don't see the outside of the aircraft except for a couple of times. It's almost entirely from Neil Armstrong's perspective. So you hear the countdown on the radio, the thing just starts violently shaking, and then you see mostly the view from the viewpoint, the little tiny window on the craft, and it really just impresses the claustrophobia and the terror that is involved in being an astronaut. Because you don't think about that most of the time. You think, because nowadays you hear the stories of these people, and it's like, oh, it's like an A to B story. It's not that exciting. It's like, no, it was not that.
Yeah.
These guys didn't know if they were coming back.
Yeah.
And the fact that it hones in on that more than the other movie is that so I think really hits this film home in a new perspective.
Yeah, and really the piece that truly is new is the piece that talked specifically about how the Armstrong family lost the daughter to cancer. And she had died at an incredibly early age, so maybe 2 or 3 years old. And everything that is impactful, think about that relationship, is impactful on that event. And then here he is getting ready to go to the moon, and his wife looks at him and says, "You are not leaving to go to the moon before you explain to your children you might not be back." And that is an incredibly powerful moment.
Good grief.
And from the children's perspective, Dad, are you coming back? To have that child and being that young and having to ask your father that question, am I ever going to see you again?
Yeah.
And how to have that conversation with the children. And, Claire Foy, boy, she was awfully good.
This is her year, man.
And you could tell it was a 60s movie because she's lighting up the entire movie, except when she was pregnant with her second son. And boy, lighting up that whole movie, and you just time and time again. And a lot of cigarettes extinguished right away, which seemed kind of wasteful, but I don't smoke, so nor do I support smoking. Just saying. And so she was amazing. We haven't even talked about the controversy. Coming into the First Man, the controversy was they didn't show the flag getting pushed into the lunar surface. And when I saw the film, it's like, I don't get that part of the conversation because
the movie's honing in on Neil Armstrong specifically.
Right. Look at the spacecraft. You see the flag on the spacecraft. You see the words United States on the Saturn V. You see the patch on their arm. When they get to the moon, they do a shot of the lunar module on the lunar surface, and there's a flag next to it, which they didn't realize until after the fact that they put a little bit too close to the lunar module because it got knocked over when they left the moon. But
it's not sitting in its pedestal.
That's all right. Had they not made it, then they would still be standing. But again, that's not important right now. Fun fact: the flag that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin left has likely turned white.
Yes.
Because of exposure to solar radiation over the past 49 years.
It's also on the ground and should be burned appropriately. So, if we're following flag etiquette, yes.
Exactly. So
we're gonna send someone to the moon and burn it now.
Right, and so that they got to bring it back and have it burned because it turned. It's on the ground.
That's gonna go over well.
Yeah. So that was just a really, to me, especially seeing the film, was a very strange and silly controversy that didn't really need to be there. That it was abundantly clear what country sent those 3 brave astronauts to the moon and what we were able to do and how they got there. I thought Ryan Gosling's performance, intentionally understated, but it just left me wanting more.
Well, you brought up the controversy. I thought the funny thing about the movie was that the film almost does the opposite of the problem that's being brought up. The movie is so clearly honed into Neil Armstrong that it goes out of its way on multiple occasions to completely not talk about any of the political events that are occurring.
Right.
Like there's one scene where right outside NASA, there's a group of protesters and there's a singer who's singing a song called "Ways on the Moon." And it's contrasted with just the image of the Saturn V rocket. I mean, the whole point is supposed to be like, we're not talking about this. This is about the accomplishment of this. We created a machine that could go to the moon and back.
Yeah.
And if you read a lot of the critics, a lot of them are saying why aren't you acknowledging all the politics and stuff in here? And I'm like, it's specifically not about that.
Right.
It's specifically about this guy.
Right.
And all my criticisms correspond just about the fact that it doesn't do it that well, but we don't go in deep enough to Neil Armstrong to make it a deeper movie. But I appreciate the fact that this movie isn't trying to be political. It acknowledges it, and then it just kind of moves past it.
Right. And we were just talking in the last segment about Woodstock taking place at the same time. Earlier this year, a movie that we discussed on a previous episode, Chappaquiddick, taking place literally while they were on the way to the moon.
Yeah.
And so all these events are happening at roughly the same time, but from a historical significance, what do we look back and what do we celebrate? We celebrate this technological achievement that, who knows how long it's going to be before everything aligns and we can maybe as a species journey back.
I think Elon Musk is working on that, so. Or China, either way.
Exactly. So how those things take place, who knows? But ultimately, here we are roughly 9 months away from the 50th anniversary of that event. And it's just...
it's never repeated properly.
Yeah, and we get to celebrate it, but that's all we get to do.
I mean, the last real huge astronomy accomplishment we did was we took high definition photos of Mars, or not Mars, Pluto.
Yes.
That was the last big thing. But that's all the time we have for this segment. Come back for the final segment. We'll get Dad's movie recommendation for the week. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back. Time to hand things over for the movie recommendation.
All right, grab your tang. We are ready to go. And keeping with the theme here, it just seemed completely appropriate that we would go back for Apollo 13. And so essentially this came from this. In 1996, there was a book written, Jim Love along with Jeffrey Kluger wrote a book about Lost Moon, about the flight of Apollo 13. Ron Howard and his production company bought the rights to it, and it became that motion picture about the flight to the moon that was considered to be NASA's greatest successful failure.
Yes.
Successful, everybody got home. Failure, they didn't land on the moon.
Also, the ship exploded. So.
Well, they didn't land on the moon. And so taking a look here at I was about to pull the top off and allow us to do some of that, but on the way to the moon, there you go. Take this piece off because that would have come off by now.
I haven't taken
this
it
would
apart
have
since I was 10.
this would have worked better had we done this during the break. All right, we will do this. There we go. Okay, no, I'm not going to do it like that. All right, so on the way to the moon again, the LEM would have been attached, which we could also do. Thank you.
You're really drawing this out.
Yes, I am. An entire side panel, which would be even cooler if it broke off, so you could recreate Apollo 13.
Morbid.
Blew out.
I'm holding back a really bad joke right now. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
No, it's not about that. It's about something else. But
so entire panel blew out, and basically this entire part of the spacecraft was no longer any good, and so this part, the lunar module, became the lifeboat so that this could go around the moon. Here, you want to take that and you can hold on to it. There you go. And it goes around the moon, and they would come home riding the lifeboat, and the story was mostly revolving around the space flight. And so Tom Hanks was clearly the star of the show. Gary Sinise, along with Kevin Bacon and Bill Paxton, the late great Bill Paxton, was also in this motion picture, who just said something horribly inappropriate concerning his appetite after he had some problems with being sick during the initial part of the flight. But again, leave you for the unedited, non-TV version of that particular motion picture. But to me, we talked a moment ago about how much or the controversy with Apollo 13 and being trying to allegedly stripping away elements of that. To me, Apollo 13 embraced the sense of patriotism, the sense of the accomplishment as a nation that got those three men home when it seemed all could be lost, and you'd have three three families that were, three families that were dealing with that loss. Kevin Bacon being a bachelor, but I'm sure he had a mother and father, so that still counts.
The nation would have mourned.
Exactly, coming into play, and so to me, it was a much different film, much different feel to it. And because of it, it had to me, at the end, was almost a greater sense of joy that you got from seeing them splash down than you got from seeing Neil Armstrong do the same thing in First Man. There was just a greater sense of joy, of accomplishment you got from Apollo 13 than you did from First Man.
Well, we don't even see them let him splash down in First Man. It's all building up to the accomplishment. This movie is building it's all ratcheted about the relieving of the tension of will they get home or not. So
right.
That's all the time we have for this episode of the show. If you want to find more episodes of the show, you can go find our Groupthink Productions YouTube page. If you want to follow me on Twitter, follow me at AntisocialCriti. That's critic without the C at the end of it. And you can find my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to work up the courage to put this in the fire.
All righty.